Welcome to the NYU Steinhardt Jazz Interview Series. And today we'd like to invite one of the great drummers in the world, composer, band leader. How about a warm round of applause for Antonio Sanchez?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You brought your people today.
At least two of my people. The other ones I don't know, but thank you for being here.
Hey, can you talk about becoming a musician? I know you came from Mexico City, so that's a far cry from the world that you now encompass. So can you talk about how you got into music and came to the U.S.? And
Sure. Well, if we start right from the beginning, I was born in Mexico City, like you said. And then when I was 5, I started becoming kind of being aware of what was going around the house musically. And my mom, she's from the Woodstock generation, you could say. So I grew up listening to anything she listened to. And I have to say my mom is one of the hippest moms on the planet. Just to give you an idea how hip my mom is, you know what she asked me for Christmas 2 Christmases ago? She said, if you could bring me the latest Led Zeppelin Blu-ray and the last Jack White and the last David Bowie, that would be great. So that's my mom. So I grew up listening to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Santana, The Cream, The Who. She says that my real father is actually Ginger Baker, which I hope is not true. But that's the kind of stuff I grew up listening to. And so when I was 5, I was being babysat by my uncle. So the short story of how I got into drums is my uncle, Nacho, had a girlfriend, Ana. Ana had a brother, Fito, and Fito was a drummer. So one day, I'm hanging out with Nacho, my uncle. We go to Ana's house. They open the door, and I see this beautiful see-through kid sitting on the living room. And I was like, wow, that's like the one John Bonham plays from Led Zeppelin. So I went in, and I grabbed the stick, and I started playing a little bit, and Fito came from downstairs furious because somebody was hitting on his drums. And then he saw me. I was like, oh, are you interested? Let me play a little bit. And I remember he put on the stereo and played Whole Lotta Love from Led Zeppelin. And to me, that was love at first sight, not with Fito, but with the drums and stuff. And that was the beginning of the end for me, basically.
But how did that transfer to jazz?
It took a long time for it to transfer to jazz. So my first lessons were just going to his place. He would teach me a little bit of technique, just enough so that I could play along to records. So I would bring my favorite records, which back then were all these bands that I was talking about. And with a little bit of technique, I could just play along, and then I would bring them home and then try to play also. And this lasted for a while. I was a rocker at heart. That's what I loved. I had my little rock bands, in school. And then after a long time of playing along to these records, actually what happened after listening to these bands for a while, my mom came one day. She said, I went to the record store and I asked them if they could recommend me something cool and new with good drums. So they recommended me this record, and it was The Police. And back then it was a new band. So I checked it out and I was blown away, and I got completely obsessed with Stuart Copeland and The Police. So I was playing along to those records all the time. And then my cousin, he came up to me and was like, you got to check out this band. The drum solo on this record is unbelievable. And that band was Rush, and the record was Exit Stage Left, which is a live record. And he has this, historical drum solo, and I just got obsessed immediately with Neil Peart from Rush. So I was between Neil Peart and Stuart Copeland for a long time. And then since I was playing along to the records, and I thought I was doing really, really, really well playing along to these records, I thought I sounded just like they did. But it's different when you're playing along to a record because you have the original guy playing behind you, so it's easy to fool yourself into thinking that you're as good. So, but I thought, man, I'm a badass, you know. So I said to my mom, maybe it's time for me to learn another instrument because this drum business thing, it's obviously I'm good enough now. So how about a piano, you know? So then I got into the conservatory to study piano, and I've always loved piano, but it was classical piano that I was studying. So I was doing my Chopin and Debussy and Czerny and all this great piano composers, and they had an ongoing jazz workshop in the conservatory, and I would be practicing and I would be listening to the big band, or they had a small combo doing their thing. And I started getting attracted to the sound. So I started going downstairs just to check it out, started talking to people, hanging around. And they started mentioning names to me that I've heard a lot of these names before, but never really quite checked out, you know, any of these musicians that much before. And the names were, of course, you know, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Pat Metheny, Chick Corea. All these names came up. And a friend of mine gave me a tape of the Chick Corea Electric Band. So I listened to that, and I went nuts, you know, because they were playing in a way that I was kind of familiar with because it had a lot of rock elements to it. They had a big drum sound. They had electric instruments, but they were soloing and playing this incredibly complex music. So to me, that was like, that's it, you know. So I got obsessed with Dave Weckl for a while, Vinnie Colaiuta, Dennis Chambers, and I went head first into my fusion stage. And that lasted for a while, but of course, it required a lot more technique, a lot more musicianship in general. So I was practicing a lot, and you know, in front of the mirror, making sure my hands looked just like Dave Weckls and Vinnie Colaiuta's. And I would get my hands on any instructional video I could. This was before the internet, so in Mexico it was really hard. So if you had a video, I would beg you on my knees for 3 days. You would lend it to me for, you know, a couple of hours, check it out, copy it, and then return it back to you. So I mean, things were a lot harder back then in terms of available jazz education, you know, and videos and stuff like that. And so I was playing along to all these records, Chick Corea, John Scofield. You know, I was trying, you know, but it happened again, amazingly, that I thought I was playing just as good as these guys. And I thought, man, I think I'm good enough now. So I'm gonna try to go to the United States and show them what a genius I am. And that's what led me to Berkeley. I applied to Berkeley and I got there. And I mean, this is a whole other thing we can talk about. But you know, I went into Berkeley, and that was the beginning of my real jazz education when I was 21.
Well, when you got to Boston, how did you actually compare with the other drummers?
Oh, I thought I was amazing, but I was wrong a lot about a lot of things. I realized I had a very healthy ego because in Mexico, all my friends told me I was great. And who am I not to believe what my friends tell me, right? So I thought, man, I must be really, really, really good. And I got to Berkeley. And, you know, I had chops. And like I said, I played fusion and Latin jazz and rock. So I had those kinds of chops. But I never really played straight ahead. So I would check out these drummers from Europe and from the States with a tiny 18-inch bass drum, which I used to play with a 22-inch bass drum. And I was like, man, that's weird. That sounds so puny and, you know, tiny to me. And they play so soft and so sparse. It didn't make any sense to me. You know, so I was not digging that too much. And then I had this really enlightening experience that happened to me on my first semester, which I'm fresh from Mexico. I have my stick bag. It's my first semester. And this guy named Ron Savage, who is the drum teacher, he sees me walking down the hallway. And he's like, you play drums? I'm like, yeah. Why? Well, because I have this 8th semester advanced bebop ensemble right now, and the drummer didn't show up. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yes, of course. Where is it? And then he told me the classroom. So I thought, man, this is my chance to show them how this is done, right? So I had my drums in a locker. I went to get my drums, and like I said, I was playing fusion at the time. So I had a big kit. I had a 22-inch bass drum, 10, 12, 14 toms, but they were power toms. They were like really big. I had like 7 cymbals, 3 splashes, 2 hi-hats, and my always faithful double bass drum pedal. So this is a bebop ensemble I'm going to, right? So I arrive with all my stuff, and I'm already late because, the drummer didn't show up. So I start setting up my whole kit. And all the kids are looking at me like, are you serious? And I look at them like, wait, it's going to be worth it. Just wait. So I must have taken half an hour to set up my whole thing. And then the teacher is like, okay, are you done? I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. Okay, so here we go. And they put a sheet of music in front of me. It's called Pent Up House. Never seen this thing before in my life. And he starts going like this. And where I come from, or at least where I came from, musically speaking, that was always 1 and 3 for me. So all of a sudden he goes like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm like, whoa, they count backwards over here. I thought the whole system is different, So it took me a little bit by surprise, but once I came in, I can do this. And I knew that swing was jingling, so nothing too complicated there. So I'm looking at the thing, and I had been studying music for a long time in the conservatory, but never really quite learned or studied how to interpret charts. So I'm reading it, and I'm like, I see a bunch of slashes and stuff, and I don't really know what any of that means. But I said, my duty right now is to show them what a genius I am. So that's what I intend to do. So I'm playing, and I just start blowing and blowing and blowing. And I start looking around the room, and all the kids are like, they have these faces. And I'm thinking they're impressed, obviously, So that kind of encouraged me to even play some more. And then I see this teacher, Ron Savage. He's in the corner of the room, and he's just looking at me like this. And I'm looking at him like, man, this guy is super impressed. So I'm just like, I remember my left foot, instead of being on the hi-hat, most of the time it was on my double bass drum pedal. I don't know what I was doing, but I was trying to do rolls with my feet. I had all kinds of fancy stuff going on back then. So finally, he comes out of the shadows, and he starts walking towards my drum set and starts removing things, little by little. It took him a long time because I had a lot of stuff. So, first 1 cymbal, 2 cymbals, 1 tom, the other tom, and I just started like sweating, because little by little, all the super fancy licks that I know how to do were gone. I couldn't do them anymore. So he left me with a right cymbal, snare drum, bass drum, hi-hat, but I still had my double bass drum pedal. So I was like just trying to come up with anything that would sound cool and anything that resembled any of the licks that I knew how to play. And then finally, I saw him just like, he got really annoyed and saw him reaching into his pocket. I'm like, what is that? And then I saw the drum key. And then he kneels down and starts undoing my double bass drum pedal and just takes it away, puts it by the side. And then he looks at me, and with a big smile, he's like, okay, now trade choruses, solo. I'm like, trade choruses, what does that mean? So I didn't know what that meant. So all of a sudden, we're playing, and the whole band stops. And I'm like, I stop too. And they're like, no, play, solo. Okay, so I'm trying to play anything that I could summon from this tiny little kid that I was left with. And then, so I'm thinking, okay, now I'm soloing. And all of a sudden, the whole band comes in again at the same time. And I'm like, okay, so I was soloing. What's going on? You know. And then they play for a whole chorus, and then they stop at the same time. And I'm like, what's happening? Solo. Okay. You know, I mean, it was horrible. And this was for, you know, an hour and a half. Tune after tune, it was just like completely. It was a disaster. It was the most nerve-wracking thing, you know, I had ever been through, musically speaking. And then after we were done, you know, all the kids left, and they would look at me like, "We kicked your ass," you know. And I was not looking up, you know. I was just like putting away what was left of my drum set. And then the drum teacher, Ron Savage, he saw me and he was like, "Let me talk to you for a second," because he saw I was completely destroyed. And I can tell you put a lot of work into your craft, and I really respect that. You know, you have great technique, very good ideas, but I just don't think you have been listening to jazz that much. What do you listen to? And I gave him the list, and yes, there was not that much jazz going on there, straight ahead jazz. So he said, "Let me give you discography," and one of the first records I checked out was My Funny Valentine 4 and More, the live record with Miles and Tony Williams, Ron Carter, George Coleman, and Herbie. So I put on that record, and the same thing happened to me. Like the first time I heard The Police or Rush or, you know, Chick Corea Electric Band or the Beatles. I mean, it was like, this is it, you know. And that, to this day, is one of my biggest reference. When I need some inspiration, I just listen to Tony for a little bit, and, you know, it kind of reminds me of why I'm doing this. So that was my long and painful backdoor story into jazz, basically.
Well, you had mentioned that ego was part of your existence, but I've known you all these years now, and that's probably the last thing I'd say was part of your personality. So
I hide it well. No. They definitely. My ego diminished significantly that day, and it remained in check, at least in check, all these years after that.
Okay. I know that an important person was Danilo Perez, because you started playing with him, and that led to somebody in the audience seeing you play, which was Pat Metheny. Can you talk about those experiences?
Yeah, well, before Danilo, actually, the way I hooked up with Danilo, it was after my years at Berkeley, which were 4.5 years. I tried to stretch it as much as I could for visa reasons. Then after I finished, I still needed, I messed up my practical training. I didn't do it in time, so then I would have had to leave the country. So I got into the New England Conservatory to study as a last resort, so that I wouldn't get kicked out of the States, basically. And I had the choice of studying either with drummers or with other instrumentalists, which I thought that was great, because I had been studying with drummers, all of my Berkeley years. So I thought maybe I can study with somebody that will let me know, or will give me a completely different point of view of what they want from a drummer, instead of a drummer telling me what I should be doing. So I enrolled with Danilo and George Garzon, which it was, such a great education. With George, we would just play standards, and he, the way he stretches the form and, the harmony, it was really hard for me to follow him, and it was great practice. And then I started studying with Danilo, and right from the beginning, my evil plan was to learn all his music, and then, one day, hopefully, he would understand that I knew his whole repertoire, and then call me to play in his band. So, and it worked. It worked. So I would be studying with them. We would have these private lessons, and somewhere in the middle of the lesson, I'd be like, "Hey, Danilo, man, I love this tune of yours. How does it go? It's called Panamonk or something like that. Oh yeah, there's one like yeah. Oh, do you know it? A little bit, And then I would know it perfectly well, and he was like, "Wow, that's good. Yeah, and and little by little, for a year, basically, he groomed me without maybe even knowing it for his band. And then one day it happened that his drummer back then couldn't make a couple of gigs, and he was like, "Oh, this guy knows everything." So I started playing with him, and that was a very amazing period for me to be involved in his trio, because it was really playing at the highest level that I never really quite experienced before. I had been playing with good people for sure, but never playing in front of people that had paid good money with somebody that good on a nightly basis. And he kicked my butt. I mean, it was horrible at times. I remember I had so much stress and so much tension that after each gig, my head would be about to explode. Because he would be, how you set up in a piano trio setting, like in a half moon, and he would be in front of me, and I'll be playing, and he would be like just like making faces all the time and looking at me and throwing jabs on the piano, and I was like, wow, this is I've never experienced this before. So it was a great learning experience, but it was pretty rough too at times. But it was really it helped me to kind of shoot into that next level musically.
So where did you develop this work ethic that you were just going to eat up and chew these musical styles up and learn everybody's music and be so proactive, because your career has moved pretty quickly?
Well, I mean, I've always considered myself an ambitious person and a pretty self-confident person when it comes to my drumming, at least. So I'm always also completely terrified and petrified of making a fool out of myself in any kind of situation I face. So over preparedness usually kind of compensates for my lack of self-confidence in certain situations. So, for example, with Danilo, or later with David Sanchez and Miguel Zenon, people that wrote very complex music, my way of dealing with it was just practicing my butt off until I got it right, and making sure I knew everything by heart before even the first rehearsal, and I think a lot of musicians get a little complacent with time, and I was really trying not to get self-complacent at all. I was just trying my best to do the best job all the time, and I think watching these guys work and being able to work on a daily basis with all these people, kind of instilled a work ethic that I still try to use nowadays.
Now, as a drummer, working with these other Latin musicians, I know that Latin music really has developed rhythmically different from how we see jazz in the U.S., playing off the middle of a third triplet. Mm-hmm. Those types of rhythms that are kind of uncommon for us, but I've seen you play with Miguel, and you guys chew this up. Is that something that those guys brought to you, or you understood it, or where did you guys start developing that?
Well, I started studying some of that in Mexico. In Mexico, we have a very interesting mix of music because we're so close to the Caribbean, we're very close to the States, we're close to South America. So I was aware of a lot of this kind of music. Then when I got to Berkeley, I studied it deeply with some really good teachers there, and Miguel was also my classmate, at Berkeley. So we used to play a lot together, and he always had this incredibly creative and active, especially rhythmically, mind. So just to be able to work with him and kind of train with him at school started getting me ready for than what I would be doing with Danilo and with David. And I think my sound nowadays is very informed by this period where I was really developing Afro-Cuban music, Brazilian music, Panamanian music, Puerto Rican music on the drum set, which normally you do not have drums on those kinds of music, speaking from a traditional point of view. But learning to play all these rhythms really helped me to inform what's going on over here nowadays.
Well, can we talk about your association with Pat Metheny?
Yeah, so the way Pat and I started, the way we met to begin with, I was doing this, it's a funny story. I was doing this trio gig with Danilo. We were in Torino, in Italy, and we were going to be closing for Pat. Pat usually doesn't like to close concerts. If there's two bands playing, he likes to play first, and then he splits, and that's it. So he played first, we played second, and this is Antonio Vitale, who is the promoter who has worked with Pat for many, many years. He told me this story later. And apparently we were playing after him. Well, actually in the sound check, I was just playing some stuff. Back then, I had my like a left foot clave thing going on with a cowbell, and I had bongos and a conga and a bunch of cowbells, and I had a flat timbale instead of one of the toms. So it was like a hybrid between percussion and drums, and I was doing a lot of very complex independence stuff, keeping the clave going with the left foot and then doing all these things with my other limbs. So I remember I was doing some of that during sound check, and I see a shadow behind me, and I saw long hair, and I was like, I turned around and it was him, and I stopped, and he just went like, "Hi, I'm Pat." I'm like, "Yes, I know you're Pat, man. Such an honor." Oh man, you sound great. Just wanted to say hi. That's it. And then this promoter, Antonio Vitale, told me later that after they played, they went backstage and they were having dinner while we were playing. And Antonello asked him, "So do you like this band?" And Pat said, "Yeah, I especially like the way the drummer and the percussion player play together. It's really tight." And then Antonello said, "No, but it's just one guy." And then Pat went back on stage, and he saw me doing that for a few minutes. And apparently that's when the wheels started turning. And then the same tour, just a couple of weeks later, I was playing with Danilo still at Pizza Express in London, and he was in London too, playing with his trio. And then he came after the gig, and he saw another one of our sets. And then he sent me a really nice email, very long and very detailed, saying, "I really love this about your playing," and it was almost like a job interview. Said, "So do you consider yourself, a musician that likes playing other kinds of music, or do you just like playing Latin music? When you go on tour, are you a healthy guy?" I mean, it had all these questions. I was like, it's kind of bizarre. And then at the end, it said, "What are you doing Thursday? Do you want to play?" I'm like, "Yes, I want to play." So I went over to his place, and he had a studio back then on Times Square. And we just jammed for like 4.5 hours, starting with a blues. Then we play all the things you are. And then later he would be like, "Okay, what would you play over this?" And then he would start strumming something that I would recognize was one of the Pat Metheny group's tunes. And I've heard a lot of their band, so I kind of knew what the style was. And I kid you not, I would be playing, and he would stop me and be like, "Okay, how about you do maybe 25% less on the bass drum, do 11% more on the left hand, and then on the hi-hat." And he wanted to see how well I could really manage each one of my limbs independently to his liking, So I was like, wow, this guy is super, very detail oriented. and we just kept on jamming for months, and he told me, look, I've been thinking about making a move, making a change in my band, and I think you seem like a guy that comes more from straight 8 playing than swing playing, even though I had been playing a lot of swing by then. So maybe, I'm not sure yet, but I'll let you know. And this went on for months, and there was nothing in my mind except, am I going to be in the band or not? Of course, it was driving me insane. And I remember after a few months, we had another jam session, and we went downstairs to get something to eat in the middle of the session. And I asked him, so Pat, have you thought about that thing? Have you made a decision? And like, oh man, yes, I've thought about it a lot. I think about it all the time, 23 hours a day at least. So anyway, so he was driving me crazy. And then one day, like a couple of weeks later, he said, okay, let's have another session, but come half an hour before the session because I need to talk to you. So I was like, okay, this is it. This is yes or no. But if he wanted to have another session, I thought maybe it's a good sign. And then he said, I think you would be the right guy for the job. So if you want the gig, it's yours. And it's been amazing, all the stuff we've done.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey, I want to talk about your groups as a leader and some of the other people you played, but I want to get to your Critics' Choice Award for the music you created for Birdman. Mm-hmm. How about that?
So which one do you want to talk about?
Well, how did that come about? How did they pick you for this?
Okay, so Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, the director, he was one of the hippest DJs in Mexico City when I was growing up. So they would play the coolest music, and there was before CDs, so I had my car and all I had was a radio, and all I would listen to was their station, him and Martin Hernandez, who does sound design for Alejandro's movies nowadays. And Martin was the voice of the station usually, and they would DJ together. And the first time I heard the Pat Metheny group was in their night show. So I remember hearing this band, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then they said, there's the Pat Metheny group, Last Train Home, da-da-da-da-da. And then that's when I started getting familiar with Pat. And then fast forward, I don't know how many years later, I'm playing with the Pat Metheny group in Los Angeles in 2005 at the Universal Amphitheater. And after the show, there was an after party. So I'm going from the stage through the after party, trying to get to my dressing room because I was all sweaty and I just wanted to change. And this guy stops me. He's like, man, I'm from Mexico too. You're from Mexico. I love the Pat Metheny group. It's so cool. And I was like, oh yeah, thank you, man. And I was kind of trying to leave, but he was like not stopping, And I was a little annoyed, but he seemed like a nice enough guy, so I started making conversation. And I asked him, so what do you do? And he's like, well, I direct films and commercials and stuff like that. And like anything I've seen, because I thought, in LA, every other guy is probably a movie director, so I wasn't completely impressed. And then he said, well, I don't know if you've, Amores Perros and 21 Grams, those were the movies he had done back then. And I was like, oh, you're that dude. And I got so happy, and, we hit it off right away. It was super nice. And we kept in touch through the years. Every time I would go to LA, I would call him. Maybe he would come to my gigs, or he came a few times to New York to have screenings of his movies. So he invited me to Babel and Beautiful. And, every time we saw each other, it was super cool. And then January of 2013, I'm with Tana, my fiancée. She's somewhere here, and with her grandmother, and we're coming out of this Joshua Bell concert in Miami, and my phone rings, and I see his name on the caller ID, and I pick up and like, hey, Alejandro, what's up? Like, I'm working on my next film, and I think the fall score should be drums. What do you think? You want to do it? I'm like, yes, I want to do it. Okay, I'll send you the script, and we'll talk later. I'm like, I hung up, and I told Tana, like, this just happened. And like, wow, that's so weird, And then a couple of days later, I got the script, and the whole process began. But that's how we've known each other and stuff.
And how closely were you associated with the actual movie?
This was interesting because I started sending him demos before there was anything. There was no movie. So I read the script, and he told me to send him some ideas, and I did. But what I sent him was very thought out. I thought, okay, every time Regan Thompson comes on the screen, you'll hear this little rhythmic theme, and he wanted a comedic theme. He wanted, he asked me for certain things to do as demos, and then I started sending them to him, and he wrote me an email saying, "Thanks, the demos are great, but it's exactly the opposite of what I'm looking for." I'm like, so tell me what are you looking for? And he said, I want something a lot more jazzy, more visceral, spur of the moment, improvised. And I thought, I'm the right guy for that. So when he said that, I kind of relaxed. I was like, okay, so all I have to do is do what I do on stage, which is react to my surroundings. So this time around, I just have to react to a film. But we got together at Avatar Studios one night. They started shooting the film here, but there was still nothing for me to look at. So we went to Avatar, and he would explain each scene of the script to me in great detail, and then he would have me play it, just improvise something with that idea. But if you saw the movie, the scenes are pretty long, so there's a lot of things happening in these scenes. So I would tell him, okay, every time you see in your head the next phase of the scene, raise your hand. So he would be sitting in front of me, and he would have his eyes closed, and all of a sudden just go like that, and that would mean that Regan Thompson opened the door and he started walking down this hallway, and then he would raise it again. That meant that he turned the corner of the hallway. So we must have done 60 or 70 takes of different scenes. Then they spliced. Actually, they took those scenes, those demos, and they rehearsed and shot with them already in the set in Astoria. And then they spliced those demos. They put them on top of the rough cut of the film. And then they brought me back to LA. They showed me what they did, and then I went back into the studio and redid everything, but having in mind, obviously, what he had liked about those demos and how they were placed on the film. But this time around, we changed the drum sound a lot. And in the demos we did at Avatar, the drum sounded very, very clean and pristine, and he wanted something nastier sounding because everything happens in the bowels of this old Broadway theater, the St. James. So he wanted something old sounding, beat up. So I set up the drums in a way, put vintage heads, tape them up, detune them. As a matter of fact, the first thing you hear in the movie after you see the R from Regency Films is my voice in Spanish, asking Alejandro something in the studio and detuning the drums. So they left that in there. So that to me, that's the amazing thing about him, that he's such a creative mind. He's always improvising, always looking for a different way of doing things. And, in a million years, I would have thought that just drums would work with a movie like that. And those little details that he would leave out or leave in, to me, is just genius, what he did.
Well, how did you feel when they wouldn't consider the soundtrack something that could be listed as a potential award?
Well, the thing is, it was considered for every award. Was nominated for the Golden Globes, for the Critics' Choice. That one I won. I won the Hollywood Music and Media Award. I won the Satellite Award. So, it was considered by everybody except by the Academy. So the excuse of the Academy was that there's some classical incidental music in the film, and that music diluted the original score way too much to be considered, which to me was a contradiction, because how can it be so memorable at the same time that it's so diluted? But I always say the work speaks for itself, and the fact now that Birdman won Best Movie, even if they wanted to get rid of me, they couldn't. Yeah.
Now, this is, I was looking through your website today, and there was a little section that said if you want to purchase the soundtrack to Birdman, and it said you can purchase it in vinyl. So I click on there, and it goes to Amazon, and it says, if you like this selection, you'll also like the soundtrack to Whiplash.
Okay. Well, the soundtrack is good.
What do you? Just a couple seconds on that. What's your opinion?
You know, it's hard for me because I really like the director. I got to meet him a few times and hang out with him during this whole crazy award season, and he's a super cool guy. So I don't want to talk trash about his movie, but you know, to me, I get it. You have to dramatize it for Hollywood, and that I understand. But to me, it's more like a sports film with a coach and an athlete more than a drummer and an instructor. So, like for example, but I wonder, you know, if you're a lawyer and you see Wall Street with Michael Douglas, you're probably, oh, come on, you know. So it's probably the same thing for us. You know, we watch that movie and like, come on, that's not the way it is. But there's so few movies about this and about jazz that when they make one and they get it wrong, you're like, ugh, you know. Or I don't know if you remember Mo Better Blues. Spike Lee is the same thing. Like, really? You know, I don't know.
Well, let me ask you, when was the last time you practiced so much that your hands started bleeding profusely?
Oh, this morning for this. Yeah. No, I mean, I keep telling everybody, man, if your hands are bleeding that much, you are doing so many things wrong. So I've never seen anything like that happen ever. And especially also the sweat on the drums. You see that? Man, that's disgusting. The cymbals just like oozing sweat all over. No.
Now, you're also associated with the new Miles movie.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. Thanks. I got to make more movies because that's when people applaud. I realized, yeah. It was really cool because Don Cheadle is a big music fan, and he's been to a few of Pat Metheny's shows. So from there, I got to meet him. He's very cool. We traded, info, and every time I go to LA, if he's available, he'll come to my gig and stuff like that. So he was just, first of all, a super cool guy, then a music lover, and then he loved Birdman, and he had seen me play a bunch, and then he called me. He was like, "Look, I'm working on this Miles biopic, and the last scene is going to be Miles stepping from the '60s into 2015 if he was still alive, and he will be playing with the musicians he could probably be playing if he was alive now." So he put together a super band. I mean, super band is an understatement, because I knew it was going to be Esperanza Spalding. Originally it was John Mayer, but it ended up being Gary Clark Jr. and Robert Glasper. So I knew it was going to be those guys. So I was like, oh man, that's amazing, so cool. And then I started seeing emails circulating about the date, and I saw a Herbie C copied on it too, and a Wayne S copied on it too, and I'm like, could it be? And then actually Wayne was not in the email, so I correct myself. But I knew Herbie was gonna be in it, so I got so excited. And I was in the studio because first we shot. Before we shot, we recorded the audio. And I was in the studio, and Herbie was there, and I was just so happy that he was there. And then I was about to ask Don Cheadle, so who's playing sax? And then I heard somebody saying, "Oh, Wayne is here." And I was like, "No, come on." So I got to play with Wayne and Herbie at the same time, and then it was so surreal because Don Cheadle, he looked just like Miles. So I would look at the three of them, and I was like, "Man, this is so trippy." And the tune that Robert Glasper wrote for it was perfect. So Miles, and it was just a blast. Yeah, so much fun.
So all this movie career that you've developed, I was reading in your bio this morning that your grandfather was a famous Mexican actor. Is.
He's 90. He's like the Roy Haynes of acting. He's doing 6 shows a week nowadays, and doing a play, and then he's doing a TV show during the day. So he's always been an amazing example for me on how to approach an artistic career, and that was very inspiring for me to see that you can do what you love and still make a good living and sustain your family, and that made a huge impact on me until now. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Associated with these movies, I noticed that one of your new CDs coming out this year is called the Meridian Suite, and it's very, I'd say, cinematic in format. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's as a writer, as a composer, I always felt the constraint of time. How much music you can get in a CD, how much each tune should last. Are they going to play it on the radio? To me, radio nowadays is kind of not a non-issue in terms of the content I want to put on my music. So if a tune is going to be 12 minutes long and they're not going to play it on the radio, I'm not going to sacrifice 7 minutes of my tune just so that maybe they can play it on the radio. So this thing that I started doing. So I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. 3 years ago, we were playing with Pat Metheny in Meridian, Mississippi. So I usually bring this keyboard with me so that I can write some on the road. And I came up with this thing that I really liked. So I thought, okay, I might use this later. So I saved it on my computer and I named it Meridian. So last year we were on the road again with Metheny, and I was in a hotel room, and I was like, let me check out that thing that I did 2 years ago. If I hear something, coming out of that, and I heard it and I really liked it again, which it was a really good sign. Because sometimes, I'll write something and then listen to it a couple of years later and I hate it. Or sometimes what happens a lot is that, I don't know, I'm in an airport and I think of something and I don't have a keyboard with me, so I'll get my phone out and be in a corner going like, trying to record the idea so that I don't forget it. And then, I'll listen to that idea like 6 months later and I'm like, what the hell is that? I have no idea what the tempo is, what the tonality is, nothing. So nowadays, I'm a little better at that, so I go like, okay, idea in 5/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I start singing it, and then I'm like, oh, that's what I meant. So that's a little better nowadays. But what happened was I listened to that idea, and then I just started writing after that. Came up with a head in, went back to the intro, everything was going great. And then when I saw how much I had written, it was already like 5 minutes of written material. So I was like, well, then I would have just a little solo or a couple little solos and then head out, because, otherwise it's going to be 20 minutes long. And then I thought, you know what? Screw it. Let me just keep on writing, see what happens. And then I started writing and writing and writing, and then one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, this section could be really cool, but it's already 25 minutes into it. Should I try to wrap it up now, or should I just keep going? I said, keep going. So this thing is the product of me not wanting to stop, basically. And it was a very cool experiment to do, because it brought out things in me that I would have never put on a regular record where you just have 7 or 8 tunes. Because when you put out a record, you want some coherence and consistency throughout the whole thing. And obviously, in this record, I wanted the same thing too. But I realized that long form writing allowed me to go from one section to another, which normally I think they probably wouldn't have fit if they were separate entities. But as a long tune, it kind of made sense. So I was able to get in there a lot of the things that inform my being as a musician nowadays, which is electronic music, rock, fusion, straight ahead jazz, free jazz. I mean, there's so many different sections that I was able to get away with just because I was able to do this long sections, and it somehow it made sense to me. So one of the things I had the most fun with was experimenting with completely different sounds of the drums. You know, usually I keep my drum sounding exactly the same for every tune of the record, but you know, for the electronic section, you know, it's like this super hardcore fusion electronic section in 7. You know, like let me see, you know, what it would sound if I compress the hell out of the drums and tune them really way down and bring out my friend the double bass drum pedal. You know, so which I haven't brought out in years after that experience. So I was like, man, let me go back to some of the things that I really love that I haven't had either the guts or the chance to put on a record of mine, and I did, and I think, you know, it is very gratifying to be able to go in and produce a little bit more a jazz record. I think we're so used to, okay, one day of recording, one day of mixing, one day of mastering, if at all, and then put it out. And I really took my time. I added a bunch of keyboards, a lot of voices. Tana, my fiance, she did a bunch of voices, and I did too. And just, you know, I think it's much more gratifying to listen to a well-produced record than your average, let's just record some tunes kind of record.
Well, how does that contrast your other project that's coming out?
Yeah, well, the other project that is coming out, so this is the Meridian Suite is coming out in June. And it's called the Meridian Suite, just to wrap that up, because I started investigating about, I love the sound of Meridian, you know, starting with when I started writing it in Meridian, Mississippi. So I started researching. I knew what meridians were, but I started getting deeper into it, and I realized, you know, there's all these imaginary lines going through the planet, through the sky, through our bodies, our minds, and they intertwine in a lot of ways that, you know, we're not aware of. We cannot see them, we cannot touch them, but they're there. And it has a lot of to do with the flow of energy in our bodies and in our beings. And I started getting fascinated with all these different types of meridians that there are. So the way it's an analogy with the piece is that the way meridians intertwine, I wanted the themes, the grooves, the feels of the different sections of the suite to intertwine and meet during the whole piece. So something that you hear in the beginning, you'll hear it again in a completely different harmonic realm or a different groove in the middle of the piece, and then later in the free section, it's there again, but you know, doing it done as a rubato thing. You know, so that's why I thought it was so cool to go with the concept of meridians and the concept of the different things of the piece intertwining. So this other project is called 3x3, and the record company that I've been with for a few years called Camp Jazz. They're from Italy. They have distribution here in Sunnyside, and they've been really cool to me. Everything that I've ever wanted to do, they said yes, do it, no questions asked. So this is the first time that they asked me to do something. They said, would you like to do an all-star project? And you know, every time I hear all-star, I'm like, ugh, I don't know about that, because I've heard so many all-star bands and so many records that sound so bad, you know, because it's a bad combination of people, a bad combination of egos, and you know, there's no direction a lot of times. So I was like, I was a little turned off at first, but then I thought, maybe if I do small combos with musicians that I haven't gotten the chance to play with much, or that I've never gotten the chance to play with, maybe if they're small combos, we could make this really cool, because there would be really chance for everybody to stretch and show their personality. So my idea was to write specifically for this project, and I thought, okay, who haven't I played with that I would love to play with? And the first person that came to mind was Brad Mehldau. I admire him for a long time. I love his playing. So I thought, okay, Brad would be amazing with Matt Brewer, who was the bass player in my band, who's playing with, a bunch of people. He's such a great bass player. He's very required by many musicians nowadays. I thought John Scofield is somebody that I've loved for many, many years that I only got to play with once. So I thought Scofield and Christian McBride would be pretty cool. And then I thought saxophone, Lovano, somebody that I played with again a few times, but never really too much. And John Patitucci, who I played with a lot with Chick Corea and in his own bands. So the idea was to start to do basically some of the most representative trio settings out there, which is piano trio, guitar trio, and saxophone trio, and start with a very, structured piano trio, then a little less structured guitar trio, and a completely, loose and completely, spur of the moment saxophone trio. So I wrote music specifically having Brad Meldau and Matt Brewer in mind, with Scofield and Christian in mind, and Lovano and Patitucci in mind. And it brought so many different aspects of my writing out that I would never play with my band, because in my band, I don't have guitar to begin with. So to write something specifically for guitar and specifically for Scofield, which is one of the funkiest people on the planet, was so much fun, and the same thing with all the other guys. So it was a very, very gratifying project. Just the fact that they said yes, that they got to play my music, and it was a very relaxed environment too, because we only had 3 tunes each day to do. So, it was just such a great experience. So those are the projects that are coming out. And we're going to try to put them out almost simultaneously. One is coming out at the end of April, and the other one is in June.
Are these both Cam Jazz?
Cam Jazz, both of them. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look forward to hearing those.
Yeah, I hope you'll like them.
Okay. So before we wrap up this segment, I want to just ask you, it's like, what words of advice or wisdom can you offer people that are trying to follow your path and find their own opportunities? Because it's hard out there, as you know.
I know, yes. I know it's rough out there. It's always been rough out there, but it seems like it gets rougher instead of easier. And I mean, I think the best piece of advice I can give is, don't quit, obviously. If you love enough what you do, you won't see it as, well, should I do this? Or if it doesn't work out, should I do this other thing? It's not an option to fail, I think, when you really love what you do. So you have to keep at it. And then another thing that is often overlooked is attitude. So I've heard many, many great musicians that you think, okay, in a few years, this guy is going to be the new guy. And then all of a sudden, you don't hear about them anymore. And then you start hearing stories about how unprofessional they were, how hard to deal with they were, what a nightmare they were on the road, those kinds of things. So that's something that is so important that people have to always take into consideration. We are in a business where it's all about people. We're always talking to people, we're always hanging out with people. So you have to be a people person, even if you're not. And you go on these long tours, and the way you deal with stressful situations with other people around you is going to be key in the success of your career in general. And another thing that is very important, when I was coming up, and I used to think of myself playing in these beautiful venues in front of thousands of people cheering my name, and all of a sudden I'm playing La Macarena in a wedding, and I'm like, how did I get here? What happened? What went wrong? And I'm having the worst attitude playing La Macarena. So I think if you want to get to those beautiful venues with tons of people cheering your name, you have to play that Macarena the best way you can. Every single time. Be as professional every time you're sitting on your instrument. Just give it your 150% every single time. It doesn't matter if you're playing horrible music or good music. If you want to end up playing good music, you're going to have to go through that stage where you play music that you don't like so much.
Does that apply for the Hokey Pokey as well?
Hokey Pokey, I'm not familiar with that one, but I'm sure I could play that one really well too.
Antonio, thank you, man. You are a fantastic interview. Your candor
so much.
and your humor is exceptional. So
Appreciate it.
thanks again. Antonio Sanchez, everybody.
Thank you.